Well, a new report is out now that gives us some very rare insight into how the Supreme Court made its decision on health care, and it's raising new concerns. According to longtime Supreme Court reporter Jan Crawford, Chief Justice John Roberts originally sided with the conservative justices in this case and was prepared to strike down the individual mandate. The only debate was whether the entire law would go as well. Then at the last minute, he reportedly changed his mind, despite some serious lobbying by the court's more conservative wing to hold on to him and his initial judgment. The move has some speculating that the Chief Justice may have bowed to political pressure and has others questioning not just the Chief's legacy, but the ability of the conservatives, some of them on the court, to stand true to their conservative leanings. Joining me now, Julian Epstein, who's a Democratic campaign consultant and former legal counsel to the House Judiciary Committee, and Mark Thiessen, who's a fellow at AEI and a former speechwriter for President Bush. And Mark, when I say stand true to his conservative leanings, I don't mean be a politician while you're on the high court, but conservative judicial philosophy. You worked for President Bush. He is the man who gave us Chief Justice Roberts, and he's a figure much beloved by most on the right, or at least was before Thursday. Why must we explore, his fitness as a Chief Justice, his ideology and so on in the wake of a ruling that some on the right dislike?
Because almost no one, left or right, is praising the judicial reasoning behind this. I mean, it's hard to tell whether he caved to political pressure or was simply convinced by his liberal colleagues. But nobody is out there praising the reasoning that got him to declare it constitutional. On the left, if you listen to his newfound supporters, they all praise him for bipartisanship and compromise and protecting the legitimacy of the court. But that's not his job. The Obama administration even still rejects the idea that this is a tax. And on the right, you'll be very hard-pressed to find a conservative legal scholar who is agreeing with him on the tax issue. What they say is that, well, he has he's an institutionalist and he believes that the court should defer to the elected branches of government. But in order to do that, he had to do something he promised and during his confirmation hearings he would never do, which is legislate from the bench. He rewrote the statute to make it the individual mandate a tax. So either he caved to political pressure or he legislated from the bench to reach a predetermined outcome. But in either case, it's a terrible, terrible decision.
Julian, according to Jan Crawford of CBS News, she's the one with the report, and she cites at least two sources. She says that he initially voted with the conservatives, but then as they were having the debate about whether to throw out the entire law, he got, quote, wobbly. And she said it's not known whether he was watching the media coverage and the pressure that was emerging on the justices, but that he is known to pay attention to the media, unlike some of the other justices. She says it's not known why he changed his view ultimately, but at least one of the conservatives tried to get him to explain it, one of the other justices, but was unsatisfied with his response. I mean, if he changed his vote based on a perception of a need to protect the court's legacy as nonpartisan and so on, is that a legitimate motivation?
I would say not, and I would say that the court needs to be guided by the rule of law. And let me just say, I think I disagree with the premise of the question. I think you have to consider the source. And by every reading, this report was used sources that were clearly sour grapes from decision. I mean,
Jan
consider what
Crawford's
happened
report,
last
you're
week.
saying.
Yes, consider what happened last week. And they were clearly sources from the conservative side of the court. Consider what happened. A conservative Supreme Court slam dunked and declared unconstitutional the Arizona state law on immigration. Absolutely smacked down the conservative point of view when it came to immigration. Then a conservative Supreme Court upheld the health care law as constitutional. Then the leader of the Republican Party, Mitt Romney, said that it wasn't a tax and in fact was a penalty. I think this was clearly a sour grapes effort by the conservatives on the court to try to put their spin on what happened on the decision. As for what Mark said, I totally disagree with him. I think the decision has been widely praised on the left, and in terms of on the right, the Chief Justice laid out a very clear reasoning for how this tax penalty is found not just in health care, but endlessly throughout the code when it comes to the credits for having a child, for getting married, for going to college, for home ownership.
That piece of it is what caught people by surprise, because
the minority never responded to that.
That piece of it is what caught people by surprise, because no one was taking very seriously, the tax argument at the oral argument. It was barely mentioned, and it hadn't been the basis for the lower court opinions. Well, I want to get to this, Mark, because you have a piece out today arguing or suggesting that those on the right have failed in the past to nominate justices who stick to the more conservative judicial philosophy. And Mark Levin was making this point, talking about John Paul Stevens, who was the court's most liberal member for years, a Ford appointee, Justice Souter, who was a George H.W. Bush appointee, and now there are some who are suggesting Chief Justice Roberts may be in that same circle.
Well, maybe he may not be a Souter or even an Anthony Kennedy, but that's not the standard we should be shooting for. The standard we should be shooting for is another Alito or another Scalia or another Thomas, who are assistant conservative judges. But if you look at the history of it, so let's just go back to from the Reagan years to today. The Democrats have appointed 4 Supreme Court justices. Not one has ever crossed the line in a major case to vote with Scalia, Thomas, and Alito and the rest of that crowd. By contrast, if you look at the Republican nominees during that same period, more than half of them have either become liberals or voted with the left on a number of cases, well, I think part of it is, and you know this as a lawyer, Megan, the entire judicial culture and political culture pushes the court to the left. So if you're a liberal justice, there's absolutely no pressure from the Georgetown Cocktail Circuit or the New York Times or the Legal Academy to vote with the conservatives. You'd be a pariah if you did. Whereas if you're a conservative, and you're praised by all those people if you vote left, if you're a conservative and you vote for example, to overturn Roe v. Wade or restrict the right to abortion, you become a social pariah. Yeah. And if you're a conservative who votes with the left, as we're seeing with Chief Justice Roberts today, you're a statesman. You're a bipartisan hero who saved the legitimacy of the court. So all the pressure is to vote left, and it seems that pressure works.
You know,
well, I think that would be
Julian,
news.
let me just ask you. I want to ask the question because as somebody who covered the High Court for a few years and practiced law for many years, I get very uncomfortable when people start going after the justices in the wake of their decision, left or right, because I think they have a really tough job. They're all very, very, very smart. I think most of them have a commitment to following what they genuinely believe is the right ideology for them, and that's who we put on the High Court. You know, they were confirmed by bipartisan majorities in the Senate. And do we, you know, left or right, do we trounce down dangerous ground when we start, you know, going after these individuals? And I don't care whether it's Ginsburg on the left or Roberts on the right in the wake of their decisions, Julian.
I think you're exactly right, Megan, and I think that's the problem with Mark's argument. I think, first of all, many people would be surprised to hear the court is moving to the left, given the Citizens United decision and a whole host of other decisions. I'll leave that aside for just a minute. But it's a very sad commentary on our state of affairs when somebody like the Chief Justice of the United States, a conservative, a true dyed-in-the-wool conservative, puts forth an opinion, and it's clearly based on precedent in terms of tax penalties being used innumerably throughout the code. Mark didn't respond to any of that. Conservatives haven't responded to that. The dissenting opinion didn't respond to that. But it's immediately attacked. The only explanation for it can be political, when in fact it's so well rooted in 80 years of jurisprudence that, as the Chief Justice said, it doesn't even seem to be, or at least as he intimated, it doesn't even seem to be a close call. And as for this effort by this kind of the rearguard dissenters in the court to put this story out to try to embarrass Roberts, this is a terrible thing to do strategically in terms of trying to cobble together a majority opinion on decisions in future years. I mean, to go out and to attack him publicly and use this media source to do it, it's incredibly stupid.
Does this make the Chief any more likely to go side with the right?
Julian, this is amateur hour.
So it's a tax,
But I got to ask you quickly. I got to go, but I want to ask you quickly. As somebody who doesn't like it, Mark, did the Chief Justice get it right that the real solution? I mean, how much of the anger is directed at the court because they didn't throw out a law that the majority of Americans don't like? Is that really something that the Americans can blame on the court, or is that something, as the Chief pointed out, they need to take up with their legislators?
Well, you know, that's the point, is that I don't know whether the Chief Justice caved into pressure or whether he genuinely was convinced by the liberal justices of the rightness of his position. I do know that not one single lower court accepted the tax argument, that the proponents of the law didn't say it was a tax, and to this day the Obama administration claims it's not a tax, and yet that was the justification. It's not in the law, and the problem is he rewrote the statute. He did something that conservatives have always said conservative justices should never do, which is legislate from the bench, and that's what we're concerned about, not about necessarily about political.
To respond to that quickly. I don't understand how people can keep saying the law is not popular. Gallup shows it tied, and all of the arrows are moving towards it becoming more popular.
Well, Rasmussen came out with a report today saying 52% are favoring.
And Gallup has it at tied, and all the trend lines are showing that it's increasingly popular.
All right, they're giving me the hard rap. I got another segment. We got to talk about Tomcat coming up in the next break. But you guys were great together. Thank you very much. Well, Fireworks.